Hey, how are you? Great to hear. Yeah, come in. Make yourself comfortable. Like a drink? Sure. There you go. Welcome to the Tech Lounge. Shall we begin?
Welcome to another Tech Lounge with me, Christian Scheller. I'm going to keep this introduction very brief because, as you can probably tell, I'm traveling and I forgot to bring my microphones with me. So I'm just going to introduce the guest this episode. It is Elian, who is the lead DevRel at React Bricks. But in this interview recorded at Shift in Zadar earlier in the year, we talk about Astro, and specifically Astro 5, which has just been released this week. So I wanted to get this episode out, and forgive me for the appallingly recorded introduction. Talk to you again next time.
Before we begin, there's just a few people at the door who've got some things they want to tell you. Then we can get stuck in. If you'd rather not hear these interruptions, then please support the show. You can find details in the episode and show notes.
I get the impression that a lot of people want to talk to you about Astro, and that's what you talk about. But
that's my
you
job.
actually have a job, don't you?
Yeah.
So what? Tell me about what do you actually do for a day job?
Yeah, so actually I used to work in the Astro core team for a year. I'm not working there anymore. But now I'm the lead DevRel at React Bricks, which is a CMS built on React.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah. So that's part of my day job, and then for the other time of my day job, I'm a freelancer.
Okay. And then how does React Bricks compare to, I don't know, Storyblock, Datto, like all of these?
No, that's actually a very good comparison because they kind of have the same idea. Whereas in Storyblock, you define your blocks, they're called there. You can compare them to bricks in React Bricks.
Yeah.
So what happens is in React Bricks, let's take that for an example, what React Bricks tries to do is actually build a bridge in between the marketeers and the developers. So the developer builds the website, builds the design system, and then in a visual way, your marketeers can play around with them. So basically, you design your whole website as in components, and then your marketer can stack them on top of each other. So basically, let's say you have a footer, you have a page, a page header, everything in between is composed of blocks or bricks, and then you just stack them so it's the same idea.
It's a headless CMS.
Yeah, it's a headless CMS. Yeah. Well, yes and no. Because in a sense, you're still pulling in data. It's a headless CMS, yes, but it's not comparable to, for instance, like a big JSON that you retrieve from an API and then you have to do your own thing. It's a bridge in between both.
Okay. And actually, so I'm hoping, being that you're from Ghent, you will know what I'm talking about. But my programming life started with Drupal.
Oh, yeah.
And that had the whole concept of like views, and it was kind of early days for these reusable blocks.
But yes, in Ghent, actually, the PHP world is way more popular there. JavaScript is kind of like a new kid on the block. Still. Most of the people there still use PHP.
Dries was from Ghent, wasn't he? I think.
Yeah.
Drupal, if I say it properly, I think.
Yeah, Drupal. Yeah. He's from Ghent, yes.
That was my days. I have another Drupal guy I know there very well. Maybe you've met Christophe Van Tong.
I think, do they work at...
Provenix.
What's their... What?
Provenix, the developer portal type stuff.
I'm not sure.
I don't imagine Ghent being that big, so I just assumed every developer knows each other.
Well, it depends. The thing is, I do run a meetup group there in Ghent, which is called devs.ghent, which is basically everything like for web development around Ghent. So basically, most of it is PHP or PHP style.
He must have come.
Yeah, probably. There's a lot of people. Like it's amazing. Ghent is a really active developer community.
Okay, good. But let's talk a little bit about Astro. I mean, you call it a content first.
I called it
content.
We have been struggling a little bit about like how we should word the vision. In this sense, it used to be called the content first websites builder, whatever. Now we call it more content driven websites.
Okay,
Because still there is a lot of other things you can do with Astro, and people started to think, and I don't blame them, that Astro is only for content websites.
And I would argue there's a certain areas I've personally discovered where it's not very content friendly.
No,
coming from a CMS world where I'm kind of like, even something, I don't know, maybe this has changed, but I found like just having a summary without having to put it in
Right.
manually is
Yeah.
something that many CMS would provide, and something like Astro doesn't.
Doesn't really, yeah.
Unless
Not
you-
out of the box,
Yeah.
at least. Yeah.
And just sort of, it's kind of odd that in my mind it felt like I like the project a lot, but it does feel like a developer's perspective
Yeah.
on what their content.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you. The thing is that you can't build something that's framework agnostic that is ideal for everyone. You build something that is good
Yeah.
for everyone, and they build their own solutions on top of
Yeah.
it. And in that sense, I do believe that Astro is a good fit because it is framework
Yeah.
agnostic, so people can build their own solutions on top of it. It's very extendable. It's open source first, so I think that's a very good thing about Astro. But it might also be like in that case, like you're saying, it's not specialized to any use case.
Yeah. I sort of feel like I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I know Astro personally reasonably well and
Yeah.
kind of skip the whole sort of introductory thing because I
Yeah.
think people can kind of go and find that out themselves. So I'm sort of
Yeah.
interested to know some more specifics.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, like, what was the decision to use the kind of custom file extension as opposed to, you have .astro in it? It's sort of its own language, even though it's very recognizable.
Yeah.
Like, why that instead of TypeScript or...
Honestly, I wasn't involved in that decision because that was before my time. But what I can say is that we had full control over everything.
Yeah.
Whereas if, for instance, like Solid, they specifically are using JSX because everything as in tooling exists already for
Yeah.
that, which is nice. But if you're building a file, well, how would you call it? A single file component in English? You have it and you want full support for it. And we have an awesome programmer working, Erica, on the language tooling.
Yep.
She does amazing. So I think it's a good decision in the end. And I think, one, it's recognizability.
Yeah.
You know that you're working with an Astro file, especially since you're working with any other file on top of it. It might be a .svelte file, it might be .jsx file and everything else. So I think it's a good thing to actually have their own file system or their own file extension.
And for the most part, as say, it's fairly recognizable. It's
Yeah.
bits of YAML, bits of JSX type
In a
stuff.
sense, yeah.
And-
Yeah, I mean, the body is totally
Yeah.
JSX. Yeah,
You
totally.
can figure it out.
Yeah, for sure. But I think it gives us the freedom to actually do with it whatever we want or
Yeah.
whatever we provide to be
Yeah.
a good decision.
What- Do you know what the origin story of the project was? Like, there's a lot of comparable systems.
Yes and no. I know that Nate started building on a project called Microsite in the beginning, but also Ben was working on a static generator, which was called, I don't remember actually the name right now. So it was a thing of like multiple projects coming together and thinking like, hey, maybe we should bundle forces and this is the approach we should take.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay.
I think the idea was mainly like, hey, we have an awesome system for working with static sites, but we have none with static sites first with
It's
hydration.
dynamic, yeah.
Yeah, with dynamic components.
So this is something interesting, and I'm going to actually jump ahead in the questions because
Yeah,
I
go
feel
ahead.
like it was an appropriate place to put it. There was another project that promised this a few years ago and was very popular and then kind of became overly complicated and somewhat died, Gatsby.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
how...
We-
I watch your talk and I see all the
Yeah.
features you're adding, and I
Yeah.
worry, is
No.
Astro going to get into that territory at a
Yes.
certain point?
Yes and no. And one thing, like for instance, the content layer API, I talked a little bit about it. It is totally inspired by Gatsby.
Yeah.
I think we do the thing where we learn from Gatsby's mistakes and where we learn from what actually people liked about Gatsby.
Yeah.
We also hired the same person who was working on it, which is a good thing in my opinion. Like Asorbic, if you might know him, at Asorbic on Twitter, he worked on the content layer API and he's doing amazing. The thing is, Gatsby was a good framework.
Yeah.
It really was. A lot of people used it, like for their personal websites and everything else. Like the content layer, essentially, it's a very cool thing. Like having loaders that basically provide your remote content and provide it to you like in a native system. It's a very good thing to have. Is it overly complicated? I don't think so, because in Astro we still have the ideology of being opt-in design versus opt-out design. We don't bring anything by default. We do, of course. You make decisions, but if you still want a simple content collection, which is just markdown files, you can do so. The thing is that if you have a loader and you want combined sources of content, you can do so. So basically we are enabling you to do more for the advanced user, whereas it's still the same simple things that we did 2 years ago for the less advanced user.
I'm going to carry on down this path a little bit because
Yeah.
some of the things you announced I thought were going to be, and maybe they are, you know, you spoke about hiring people,
Yeah.
which I assume means paying them. And as far as I can tell, so far the main kind of product is the DB.
Actually, no, because that was sunsetted. So there is no product at this time.
There is no commercial product.
Yeah, there is none.
So
That's correct.
I mean, how is it all from like Open Collective donations? Or?
Yes and no. So there is stuff that I can talk about from the company standpoint. I'm not working for the company
No,
anymore,
for sure,
so they're not paying me anymore. So what Astro did, and they did it from the beginning, was actually defining a really well spitted out governance model. And what happens is that all of the money that gets through us to sponsors, like for instance Vercel, Netlify, Storyblock, whatever, and that goes into an open collective.
Yeah.
And we do pay people with that, but not the hired people.
Okay.
We pay people with that who are maintainers. We have awards, community awards that goes out every month. We have core contributors who work outside of the company. They can get paid from Open Collective. Whereas everything else basically comes from a round, the pre-seed round that we did 3 years ago, I think, and it still runs on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So where I was going with this is I sort of fear that what went wrong with Gatsby was
totally
monetization.
Yeah.
And I personally, having worked for a lot of VC-backed companies in the past few years, kind of feel like it can really kill things.
For sure.
So how do you keep going forward without that happening?
No, that's the good thing about Astro. Like in a sense, the governance model is that specified that even if the company falls, the project would still be standing.
Okay.
Because people we have, like, let's say we have a couple of roles, but like the two biggest ones are basically core contributor, like core maintainer contributor, core community contributor, sorry, and then core in residency, I think we call it. And core in residency, basically you lose your role when you are unhired by the company, when you're not working for the company. But everything else is also voted for. So the people with the actual role can vote you in that role. Okay. So that will mean that people, whenever that project falls down, there is still project steward, there is still core members, there are still maintainers outside of the company.
Okay.
The only thing that would change is that they're not getting paid by the company, or if the open collective dries out, that they can't get paid.
Okay. So just to wrap up the business talk,
of course,
very, very quickly.
Yeah.
So if I understand correctly, then the studio slash DB was intended to be a kind of SaaS.
Yeah.
And if I understand correctly, when you mention now it's like, I'd not actually heard of the technology you mentioned, but now it's the compatible means you can basically bring your own. I guess,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what it was, Astro Studio was basically a hosted database provider. We sunsetted it because we didn't see any value in actually keeping it up and developing it by ourselves if there is better technologies doing that. Yeah. So what we did was AstroDB, which is the open source technology that is the ORM and everything else, we opened that up to be able to actually talk to any libSQL, which is it's called libSQL database. In the future, we do see it as being able to talk to MySQL databases or SQLite or anything else.
Yeah, okay. And that's interesting because then you do get into the CMS or at least
well, honestly,
maybe more like Laravel or something.
Yeah, I was about to say, I do see Astro replacing Laravel in the JavaScript ecosystem.
Yeah.
So, like, it's not a direct competitor,
or
but I do see it doing the same thing. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And then I need to do some digging into Next, but I assume it has some kind of ORM thing. Or...
Not really.
No?
Not built in. Well, not in the same way. Like, Next provides you with a lot of stuff you can do and like a lot of packages that they recommend, but actually nothing out of the box, like nothing first party. It's mostly third party.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So, version 5 coming out. Well, I'm going to say the 17th because tomorrow.
Yes, that's tomorrow. Yeah.
This interview will come out in the future. So.
But it's not it's not the 5.0 final release. It's the beta version. Yes.
So let's quickly go through some of these features. The content layer API. So one of the things I did really love with Astro is the content collections. I think the only other tools that really had that concept were Jekyll.
Hugo has a kind of similar.
Yeah, sort of. So,
exactly
coming from a CMS background, I always liked the concept of content types, even if it was in a very loose kind of way.
Yeah.
I was actually, to be honest with you, in the presentation, I was kind of struggling to understand what the difference was between, because you say it's going to deprecate.
It's the
and
same and
become-
it's not the same. So what the difference is that content collections were purely markdown files.
Yeah.
It still is, but the content layer API supports multiple loaders. So
Yeah.
you could combine collections, you can have multiple collections from different sources.
Oh, and you can combine multiple sources into one collection.
For sure.
Because that's something I want to do for ages.
Yeah,
And I've had to fudge it. So far.
Exactly.
So,
So yeah, that's a hacky way
Okay.
that we had now, and that's where we, for instance, we took a lot of inspiration from the Gatsby.
Okay.
So what will be happening is that now, instead of having the content collection, which was markdown files separated in folders and then being type safe and validated by Zod, is that you will have it in a loader. And the loader could still load your local markdown files. So the file provider or the file loader. The same thing. But you could also say, hey, but I have this headless WordPress running somewhere and I want those files loaded in because I want those to be my content collection.
Yeah.
And you can still do the same thing.
And it could be mixed.
Yeah.
The blog could be markdown files and
Yeah.
See
and
that?
then you could load your images in a loader somewhere else and maybe something else.
Okay, interesting. All right, okay, good. Good, because for a second I didn't entirely understand.
Yeah, okay, but that means
So,
that I have to flesh it out to make it more clear in the talk.
Okay. And the actions,
Yeah.
is this, I mean, you compared it, I think, to something in the
Well,
talk.
I said Next.js server
Next.
actions.
Is it, forgive maybe my ignorance here, but is it a little bit like kind of also Netlify's functions and things like that, or?
I mean, it's a function, so yes. Yes and no, because if you want to call a Netlify function, you're exposing it to public API.
Yeah, okay, yes, because you explicitly
So
mentioned.
basically, what
private,
happens is it's a secure, a secure calling from your client to your server and never exposed to anything else. And it's also like very native to Astro, so you can do it.
So I think the thing I noted as a particular use case at the moment, one of the only, well, apart from what I could now replace with the content layer API, the only other kind of public function call I have is to embed like a Substack newsletter sign up. And I could
No,
make
you know
a
what I
custom-
see it useful for is different things. For instance, like form submissions.
Yeah,
form
yeah,
handling.
this is a
that's
form
mostly the thing.
Yeah.
But you also gain out of the box that you can accept form data inside of the action. You can validate it inside the action. So all of that handling that is typically quite difficult to do, like the error handling is difficult and it's being handled out of the box by Astro
It's Zod, isn't it, I think?
and Zod.
Yeah.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. Okay. Now, server islands. Now,
Interesting. Okay.
I must admit, because whenever I'm looking on Astro documentation, I endlessly see the explanation of islands.
Yeah.
And I will be quite honest with you, I've never entirely understood.
Interesting.
I think it possibly means because I'm not really using it without realizing. And in some respects, I kind of understood server islands more than what you have at the
No,
moment.
but it makes more sense because
really
it's
more
a
sense,
more
yeah.
paradigm that you're used to with Next
Yeah,
or anything else.
exactly.
Like you can actually compare it in a sense to React Server Lines. It's what I'm saying, React Server Lines, React Server Components.
Being an old man, it's a little bit like
makes sense.
Ajax in some respects. You just have
No, it literally is the same thing.
Yeah.
It is almost like HTMX and those technologies. It's the same thing. But it's a way nicer API to use.
Yeah.
It's way more fleshed out for you as a user. Whereas I think what we're trying to improve here in that specific use case is you can totally do it by yourself. But we're trying to improve the developer experience more than I think the actual technology.
Okay. Yeah. So, saying all of this, one thing I've noted, so version 5 soon. I don't know, the project must be, I would say, less than 5 years old? Or
3. 3.5 maybe. No.
So, it does move very quickly.
Yeah.
And I will say, between versions, it's not afraid to break things and change things.
It is.
And I sometimes wonder, like, I know, for example, I've had to change the content collections at least once.
Yeah.
Images had to change at least once. You know, often in every version, something fairly major can
Yes
happen.
and no. You're right in a sense. If you want to have the full
For sure.
advantage,
Yeah.
it doesn't really break things. It just gives you the option to
like some
take full
things-
advantage of it.
Like some things did, but who
I've
knows?
seen people upgrade like from version 1, like Astro 1.0, or even subversions to Astro 4 without any problems. That's happened quite a lot. Actually, Astro is really upgradable. It doesn't make a lot of breaking changes. It does deprecate a lot. It's different.
Maybe I followed the wrong path then.
Well, one thing I can say is that by every version we release, we always have a version upgrade guide already ready and on the documentation ready to go, including like what to do if you want to change this, or like it is very clear, like in version this we did this way, now we are doing it this way, and that's the advantage you gain. For instance, like in version 5, for instance, content collections will be outdated. You can still use them. You just won't have the advantage that you will gain from using Content Layer API. So I don't think it's breaking changes. It's more of like making sure you use all of the advantages that Astro has to offer.
I definitely feel like things broke, but I can't remember specific examples now. But maybe it was...
Depends on what you're using, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting thing, because I do sometimes feel like I have hit instances where...
Well, you're mentioning assets, which is a very interesting one, because that was a breaking change.
That was a breaking change.
Yeah, because we used to have a separate package which was add Astro.js/image, and that became a native package which was Astro Assets, Astro::assets, which had a kind of different API but did the same thing. And migrating wasn't too hard, but of course it depends on how hacky you get with things. And knowing you might get hacky with things. And that's totally fine. But yes, of course, things break easily.
That's really hacky. It's more that I try to do things on the cheap sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're taking advantage of the system we give you, so that's totally your...
But I sort of always wonder this, when you have a project that is general purpose, but there is definitely a feeling that from the maintainers there are opinions. And sometimes if you kind of go against those opinions for whatever reason... how do you maintain that balance so it functions as well as possible without annoying people just like, I just want to...
In a sense, I think Astro does that really well, because before every feature is released, it has an RFC. An RFC is basically request for comments. We open it up, we propose an API, people can comment on it, and then we flesh it out. We have a super active Discord where everything gets posted, people chat, and people actually change things. So I think that's one of the things that actually is very and really good at Astro. And then once it gets implemented, we phase it in an experimental phase. It's a flag. You can enable it in your options. People use it. People give feedback, and we tend to go quickly on those.
Okay. On the subject of the Discord, actually, this wasn't a question that was on my list, but you just remind me of something. As far as I can remember, Astro was one of the first projects to use Kappa for the AI interface into documentation.
Yeah, that's true.
I think you still use it.
Yes,
you initially had Houston and then...
Yeah, so we had Houston AI, but that was more of like an experiment. Like, what if we feed our whole documentation to an AI and see whatever chatbot comes up with? The thing is, that's not really an affordable solution.
Well, this was actually going to be my question, because I know Kappa fairly well. I worked for a period of time for Docker, who also took on Kappa.
Yeah.
But one thing I've heard on a lot of these projects, and I think this is why people do it through Discord, because it's a bit of a gate, is that often the cost, as awesome as it is, can outweigh the benefits.
I can't speak of the cost because I actually don't know it. And I wouldn't be surprised if we got it for free from them to actually have a trial or like as an advertisement from them. But what I do feel like is that it still hallucinates too much. Even though it knows the documentation, it doesn't work too reliably. And I think combining Algolia with actual human documentation would still perform better.
So, but the Discord is still using it, isn't it?
Yeah, it's still there. But basically what we do is you have basically it's a forum called in Discord, right? So you ask a question to the AI and you can upvote and downvote the things. And then we give that feedback to Kappa as well, because we're in contact with them. And they're pretty nice people, they're pretty good.
There's not many of them. So.
No, exactly. So it's really cool. But I think, speaking for myself, if I have a question about Astro, I'd rather ask it to human people than a chatbot. Because I always...
In honesty, I actually had the opposite experience. I had found it.
Interesting.
I got better questions, better answers to questions I asked than from humans. Because often, when you ask a human and you have an edge case question...
Well, they also have opinions.
Depending on who's around, it just doesn't get answered. Whereas at least the bot will answer you.
Yeah.
And once, I can't remember what it was, but actually it was the only answer I could find.
Yeah.
And I actually even heard this from the Docker people that... beyond answering questions, it started writing people's Docker files, and it was like this.
Interesting.
And it wasn't the initial intention, but it actually was still useful.
No, of course, exactly.
So it kind of gets weird at a certain point where it starts doing more than you wanted it to, And is that like, is it good, is it bad? I don't know.
The problem that I have with not necessarily asking AI for help or for things that you're stuck with is that you already know what you're stuck with and probably have an idea and know how to solve it. What I do feel like is that people now resort to AI too easily and they lose their debugging skills and they lose their skills of solving problems. And I think that's an issue.
It's a separate...
Yeah, that's a separate discussion. We can go on.
No, it's a very separate...
about that.
Exactly. And
but I do think it's a serious thing.
An event full of people bestowing the virtues of...
Because when I started with Astro, I was 21 years old. That's still very young, and that's fine. But the thing is, if I see people now coming out of university, they already use AI, and they trust AI too much, and then they will come to our Discord and say, hey, I got this answer by an AI, and it doesn't work. Yeah, that's because it's hallucinating. It's a function that doesn't exist.
Yeah, and then the whole... I mean, like, this is obviously a big topic, but they kind of say the whole like junior developer is going to be very hard for people to become because at jobs they'll just replace juniors with AI. Yeah. And if you're mid and up, you're fine, at least for a while. But starting your career is going to be a challenge.
Yeah, for sure. I think in a sense that web developers specifically, like, I mean, in a sense you already have like V0 or something like that. So you can design good looking UIs without actually any hassle. I think the more junior profiles in the near future will resolve more about being able to solve problems and being able to debug code than it is to write code.
Yeah.
I think both are important for sure.
Editing, yeah. Okay, so version 5, probably at time of release, is out, shall we say? Any idea, loosely, what will be on the roadmap for 6?
Actually, no.
Okay.
Because what Astro typically does is we release something and then we'll wait a little bit and see what's the next thing. Like, for sure, the first releases will be like bug solving and making sure that everything in 5.0 works and works reliably well. And then it will be like, hey, we have an idea like to kind of improve this API. Like people are starting to use it in this way. What if we did it that way? Yeah. And then we'll start on 6.0. Yeah. So actually, no, I don't have any idea.
Maybe one final question, we'll just come back to the business conversation briefly. It's as far as I can think off the top of my head, you're the one kind of major-ish, depending on people's measures of these things, web frameworks that is not owned by somebody. React is kind of Meta.
Yeah, React is...
Next is
Vercel,
et cetera, et cetera. So I suppose, how does it keep going?
Yeah, good question. And by the way, no, not really, because Nuxt also has Nuxt Labs behind.
Okay, it's not one I know so well.
Just I'm telling you that they also have a company behind it, same idea. And Nuxt Labs, they have a couple of products as well. They have Nuxt Hub and they do consultancy and everything. How does it keep going? In the long run, I guess we'll have to, the Astro Technology company will have to have a paid product for sure. But for now, we can still run that pre-seed and let's take it as far as we can. And let's hope we don't run out before we actually can build something.
Okay. Actually, I'm going to ask one other question that I may edit back in somewhere else. You also mentioned, and it is something I have tried because I come from a background of tech writing, and you have Starlight, the sort of documentation flavor.
Yeah, exactly.
I have various opinions on Starlight. It's a whole other... But I was kind of interested to know mostly like, why spit out something separate and not sort of have an optimized... I know Astro doesn't really have themes, but, some kind of like more... I don't know, package or something.
So Astro actually has themes, a lot of it.
Yeah.
And Starlight has
not
themes.
inbuilt.
No, for sure. But what Starlight gives you out of the box is not something that typically Astro uses with one out of the box. Because in Astro, typically what people do is build their portfolios, build their web applications. Whereas if you're looking for documentation websites, you're looking for sidebar, you're looking for SEO integrations, you're looking for icons, and all of that stuff. So that's why it's separated from a whole different point. Well, actually, Starlight was also like born out of our own necessity. It's built because we needed something to build our own documentation in Astro. We had a lot of random scripts and everything else to generate the documentation. So why not separate it from Astro and make it a package so everybody can use it? And actually, we're starting to see some great adoption on this.
I was wondering because, I mean, in that space, The kind of bigger market is like Docusaurus, and they're similar.
It's very similar, for sure.
But yeah, it was just interesting to know.
I guess the point is that, one, it's static by default, and you still get all the goodies that you get with Astro, which is multiple framework support, for instance. Like, what if you have a website or a documentation website for something that's framework agnostic? You might want to have examples in this language, in that language. It gives you that out of the box. But also, like, it comes with some features that maybe other will have as well. Like, for instance, Docusaurus, I can't imagine that they have similar feature, like, for instance, the tabbing component.
Oh, no.
Yeah, they will have it.
Yeah, every...
But one thing that, for instance, was born out of Starlight is expressive code. Okay. Expressive code is basically a framework agnostic, how do you call it, like code highlighter, basically? So you can have a code component in Markdown, like Shiki has, basically. But it's more, it's different, and you have more options. And it's born out of it.
Just as far as I understand, the feature that you mentioned in the talk was to add authentication or documentation?
No, SSR in general. So on-demand rendering. So basically, what we have...
So that login window is just more of a...
Yeah, for instance. Yeah, so basically...
That would actually be something very useful, would be authenticated documentation.
No, that's exactly the... for instance, with Docusaurus, you can technically do it, but it's all client-side. Yeah. Whereas with Astro, you have the server-side rendering, so now you can do it in Starlight as well.
Okay, yeah. Because that's something that has come up a few times when people want to have, like, and public docs versus private docs.
Exactly, and the great thing about having Astro as like the back end of Starlight is that you can actually define each page. So you can say, hey, all of this is public. Yeah. It's just this page that has authentication.
Interesting. Okay, cool. Well, that could be interesting, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
So, obviously Astro people can find by looking at his astro.dev, astro.build.
Astro.build is the website,
And for you have a handle you use.
Yeah, I have at Elian Codes, which is my name. And of course, my website is Astro.build. Sorry. No, it's Elian.codes, so the same thing.
And React Bricks.
Yeah, React Bricks is react-bricks.com.
And is that also open source, or is
it's
that a product?
Partially open source, but of course there is a product.
People can try it if they want to.
Yeah, exactly. There is a free trial as well, and it's pretty great. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you very much.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome, man.
So that was it. That was our guest today. Thank you very much for joining me in the Tech Lounge. I have been Christian Schiller. If you want to know more about Tech Lounge, head on over to christianschiller.com, or please tell your friends about us. It's quiet and cozy in here, but the more listeners, the merrier. You can find more at christianschiller.com/podcast, or in the show notes or episode notes, wherever you found this podcast. Thank you very much for joining me, and you're most welcome next time.